What's up, YouTube? So there's been somewhat of a revival of 90s and early 2000s style in music recently, and I'm enjoying every moment of it. But one thing that I'm noticing that's not really being talked about too much is the sounds that we're hearing that are kind of influenced by garage. So let's have a look at a really classic garage style bass sound. So this track that actually inspired the sound that I'm working on today is not a classic garage track. It's actually pretty new, but it has all the hallmarks of that classic sound. So anyway, let's have a look. I quickly just want to talk about the MIDI pattern. There's something that is slightly different here to what I usually recognize, is that there seems to be somewhat of a kind of I'm not sure what scale this is, when you use the F, the E, the C sharp, and the C. I'm not quite sure what scale this is, but it just kind of works. One thing that I noticed with this style of music is that I guess music theory and that kind of thing takes a backseat to just the groove. So you may end up doing something that doesn't seem intuitive to maybe what you know from music theory and that kind of stuff, but just follow the groove. So another thing that's also counterintuitive is this lead here is totally detuned, but it just works. You know what I mean? It's the wrong key. It's even in the synth patch, it's detuned a little bit. Okay, a lot. It's detuned by half a semitone. So it's a key that doesn't exist in music, basically, that's playing there. But it grooves, you know what I mean? And so I think that's the important thing, is don't always lock yourself into specific scales, don't always lock yourself into specific rules and stuff. In music, kind of just go with the flow and feel the groove. And I think that's something that's so special about this kind of older retro stuff, is I feel like maybe one of the reasons why it's making such a big comeback is that we maybe reached a bit of a critical mass with overproduction and that kind of stuff. And so stuff that's just pure groove is kind of rising back to the top again. So anyway, this is the bass sound. It just goes F, E, C sharp, C, bunch of C's, and then here it does this kind of alternating octave thing, which is really groovy as well. So another thing to notice is that the accent is on the second beat. So it goes poof, dum, 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 dum. And that's another thing that you'll notice very much in this kind of style of music, is that the bass accent is often on the second beat rather than on the off beat or something like that. So it's kind of just more these kind of simplistic ideas that we employ to just feel the groove out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this MIDI pattern onto this track. And another thing to note is that when I write my tracks, because for me it's easier to identify what notes are in the scale just using a specific scale like C, for example, then I can quickly see, okay, the C sharp is weird, this E is weird. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it just helps that way. But then what I do is I transpose the stuff to whatever the track is that I'm working on. So this particular track is in F, so I just +5. And so that way it just kind of makes it easier for me to quickly jump in there and see, okay, this note works with the scale, this doesn't work, and that's maybe why it grooves. Does that make sense? So it's just a quick way of being able to identify stuff that I know. Okay, for now it's pretty basic. So what I want to do is I actually want to put in some sidechain over here. I'm just going to copy this because it's the sidechain from the kick. So that just makes it a little bit easier. I don't have to set it up all the way, Okay, cool. So what we want to do here is we want to set this to a square wave, right? So let's go basic shapes and let's set this to a square wave. And we want to detune this by -12. So something that's interesting about the square wave is that the square wave is only odd harmonics, whereas the saw wave is every harmonic. And so when you add a square wave that's detuned by an octave onto a saw wave, you get this kind of subtone, and the saw wave basically has every second harmonic gets reinforced. So it's actually a trick that's employed in the old Roland SH101. The sub oscillator isn't a sine, it's a square, which is, weird in a general sense of the term, but most of the time you're not actually using just the sine wave in that synth. You're using it alongside a saw. So the sub is basically generates that kind of low fundamental, but then it basically just reinforces every second wave. It's an interesting trick that is kind of like you used to see quite often in early 90s kind of sound. To get a really big bass sound is detuned by an octave square with a saw wave layered in there. And so what we want to do is we want to set the phase randomization both to 0 so that they're going to kind of always align. You notice how it kind of sounds a little bit jagged, but at the same time it's just more reinforced. So here what we want to do is we want to play a little bit with the mix. And then we want to send both of these through a filter. So we enable it by pressing this OSC2 button over here. And let's turn down the resonance. Okay, so here what we want to do is we want to create some movement on this filter. So we use an envelope with a pretty high attack. And so what this does is this basically creates that kind of like warp, warp opening movement on the sound. And sometimes what'll happen is like the sound might sound like there's too many kind of harmonics layered over each other. So you can actually get you can counteract that a little bit by giving the square wave some unison and detuning it ever so slightly. And so that way it kind of just makes it sound a bit more lively and not so static. Do you notice the difference there? Okay, so the rest of the sound is in the effects. What we want to do is we want to add a little bit of soft clip distortion. We can just drive it up ever so slightly over here. And then what we want to do is we want to set this to pre. And now we want to use this filter that's in the distortion to just give it a little bit of extra movement. And we do that with the same envelope over here. So we can just drag this onto this cutoff. You see, we're already starting to get to that sound. So when the filter opens up a little bit too much, there's still a little bit of high frequencies, which I don't really want too much. So I'm just going to add this equalizer over here. In Vital, we can enable this high cut and then just turn down the resonance a little bit and then turn down the cutoff just so that we're cutting off a lot of these kind of high frequencies. You see now we've just got that kind of like warpy bass sound. And we may want to just adjust this attack depending on the groove of the track, you know what I mean? So now is when I would actually jump in, start playing the track, listening to the patch alongside it, and, you know, developing the sound to fit the specific context. Okay, so there's a bit of a change up here, like a fill with the bass, and I want to talk about how I've done that. So the notes actually change a little bit here. You'll notice that instead of doing the dum dum dum, it goes F, G sharp, G, dum dum dum, and then carries on with the exact same pattern. So a trick that you'll often see with this kind of stuff is to use a filter in high pass mode to kind of like do these kind of fills and like breaks and fills for the bass, because it kind of adds that whisper wobble type effect. So what I do is I just, you know, move it ever so slightly like that. We can modulate it like just like this, dun dun, and then what we're going to do is we want to turn the filter on and off. So we can do that by just switching this button over here, and you'll see that this modulation lane actually turns on. And so now what we can do is we can just assign that modulation like this. And so now it's going to switch that filter on, do the high pass, switch it off, and go back to the original bass sound. And you could also use that high pass effect in like intro-y type things. So let's just recreate this a little bit here. Take some of this stuff away. Just going to cut this up a little bit, and we can repeat this part here. Awesome. That's about it. The rest is up to you. You know, make it work in your track, see how it works, change the tempo, change the sound, change the key, you know, see what works. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think about this tutorial. If you like this kind of sound and you want to see more of these kind of classic retro kind of remakes, let me know as well. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys next time. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that like button. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.